Hello everyone, it's Tana. Welcome back to my channel and another video for the Rabbit Hole Designs. We're going to hop right into it today. I'm showing you here the things I have yet to use in the latest release. And we get to everything except for the cotton flower stamp set, but you'll see that in a few videos or so. So we're going to do some ink blending here, and I'm trying one. We're going to make two of the same card. One will be with Distress Oxides. One will be with my Catherine Pooler inks, which are dye-based. And read my note up there, because if you're planning on hot foiling after ink blending instead of before, you want to make sure that stencil stays upright in the right position so that your foil plates match up to your ink blended leaves. Okay, moving on. So here I had these scraps of Bristol, so I made two strips with Catherine Pooler ink, two strips with oxide ink. It didn't come out with the equal number of leaves for each one because it depended on the leaves I used. But I tried to make sure I used at least every one of them once, which would mean we should have at least 11 different leaves by the time we finish our 4 ink blended panels. And I tried to make sure I used color combinations that wouldn't turn muddy. I did use a combination of red and green once, but I tried to make sure that they stayed simple and I didn't blend them together too much so it didn't turn muddy. And here's my last Catherine Pooler leaf here. Of course, I'm not going to show them all to you. There is a lot of ink blending in this video, though. I try to make it short and sweet. So there's those. And then we have our oxides. I don't know why the names aren't up there for you. I tried to make sure they were all on screen for you guys. I was having a problem with my overlay titles. I did fix it before this video went out, but some of the titles I thought they weren't going to show up, so I never put them in. And then I figured out the problem all by myself. Pat myself on the back a couple times. But I believe for this one I pulled out Mustard Seed, Rustic Wilderness, Lumberjack Plaid, Carved Pumpkin, and Rusty Hinge. But I ended up not using the Rusty Hinge too often. I was kind of hoping for a deeper, darker orange than the Carved Pumpkin. But by the time you ink blended it with other colors, you really didn't need to. Oh, I took out the Rusty Hinge and I used Crackling Campfire instead. So now here I'm marking to myself that this is the top of my 6x6 stamp. Because once again, if you're going to use the stencils and not cut the strips apart of your cardstock, you're going to want to know where the top of that stamp is. And I decided to fussy cut them out as close as possible because once again I used strips. I did not use my stamp all at once, which you can certainly do. You can stamp them all out at once and then ink blend and pay attention to where your stencil's going. I didn't do that because I wanted to use up my scraps, but it was easy enough to line them up, kind of look through the misty door, make sure they were fairly lined up fairly well, and then stick them onto there because they'll stick to a photopolymer stamp, and then stick them down on my misty sticky red. I did try marking with a piece of pink tape where they all should go. It didn't work because then I couldn't use my stamp glider thingy majig on the window, or on the door, so I took them all off. And then I'm going to use the ones that were ink blended with Catherine Pooler inks with gold embossing powder. And then I'm going to use the hot foil plates on all the ones that were blended with oxide ink. So we're making the same card, but we're making little tweaks to it so that they're each not quite the same. And here's an oops for you. So I was off the screen And I was trying to heat emboss my leaf before I even put any heat or embossing powder on it. Imagine that. Do you know that watermark ink was still sticky enough for me to put heat or embossing powder on it? I didn't have to restamp them. Thank goodness. That would have been a pain in the butt. So here are the first set, all heat embossed with gold embossing powder. Don't forget to use your powder tool if you have one. That's going to make a difference. You don't want a whole bunch of gold speckles throughout your leaves, unless you do. That'd be a kind of cool look. Maybe it would look like there's holes in your fall leaves. So here I'm showing you all colors of hot foil that I chose to use. So it ends up being like 2 per color, maybe a few more than that, because I think there were a lot of smaller leaves in this set with the oxide inks. So I did the same thing. I fussy cut them down as far as I could and did the same thing with the foil, which took a little bit longer, but because of the way I did it, this is what I had to do. And then taped each in place, and then kind of lifted my hot foil plate back just a little bit on 2 sides to make sure it was lined up pretty good. And it actually didn't take too much time, and they were all lined up pretty good. I think cutting the foil took more time than anything else, because that stuff is hard to cut even when you're cutting a straight line. So here you see me pulling it out. It goes through my die cut machine. Now we're going to take a look. And I skipped, foiling all of them, skipped ahead to the reveal. Now I did save the negatives. Maybe I can figure out something to do with them, so I did put them aside when I was all done. And then I will finish fussy cutting these out properly. Now I fussy cut all of them out, left no white line, but I did not outline them with black ink. I was trying to stay with a more natural look, and I didn't want them to have black ink on their edges. Did you see how dark that overlay title was? That was because I was messing around with it, trying to figure out why it wouldn't show up. So some of them might be different colors than I normally use. Just a little disclaimer there. So now we're making our backgrounds. I pulled out some more Bristol. I'm using like a yellow into an orange into a red. So I believe this one's Sauna, Ginger, Terracotta, and Merlot. I believe Merlot. We'll see here in a second. And of course the CP background will go with the CP leaves, and so on and so forth. And I did skip a lot of the ink blending because I went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and using my brush lightly so I wouldn't get any streaks. And it is Merlot, but it turns out kind of reddish brown on this once you ink blend it with the orange. But it was exactly the look I was going for, so I'm happy with my color choices. And when I switched to the oxides, I remember to use a totally different set of brushes. I have a set for my dye inks and a set for my oxides. The oxide has a different texture to it, and the brush won't be the same if you try to use it with dye inks after that. Okay, so here are the colors I used for the background, and it's about the same as what I used for the leaves, minus the rusty hinge that I used once or twice. And we're doing the same thing here, blending our yellow into our oranges, into our reds. This one I did with the Bitty Blender, hoping that I could get a little bit more finesse with each color as I blended them together. I have to say that by the time I was done, maybe it was a little bit easier to use a smaller brush, but I think the same amount of color is on both. So I don't think it really made too much of a difference, but you can use either or. I think time-wise, it didn't really make a difference because I was going so much lighter, light-handed with the bigger brushes. I'm surprised I left so much in here. Thought I got rid of it all. There you go. So each time I show you a little bit and then move forward. And it kind of, I didn't put too much blending in, like you can definitely tell the center from the rest. But by the time you put all the leaves on and the sentiment, I put a lot of splatter on there, guys. So if you don't like splatter, you might want to do less, or maybe clear splatter and not colored. So we used Avery L clear shimmer spray, and then 2 micro sprays by Tim Holtz. I believe it was some type of cranberry and a green. I know it was up there on the screen for you guys. And this time I used a fan brush that I bought a pack of them in different sizes specifically for splattering, and that's it. So I won't be watercoloring or anything with these. I love the color of that red. I think it's gorgeous. I do have to say, I do like the spatter, but I probably would have gone with a little less color if I had known they wouldn't show up as bright. Or gone clear, totally clear. So now I'm going to take It's Fall Yellow from the Fox set, but we're going to replace fall with the bigger word. And at first I forgot this, so I inked up and stamped and heat embossed It's Fall Yellow as one sentiment. And we're using Judy Kin's sparkling embossing powder. And then I chose the red from each set of inks to stamp out the sentiment. And here's another oops. I think it's what I just told you though. Yeah, so I realize that, oh, I know what this is. Now you see me hitting that? Guys, I could not believe this happened. I'm heat embossing and I'm like, what is that smell? I could not figure it out, and then I looked down inside of my heat tool. A stink bug had crawled inside my Wagner heat tool and fried himself because I didn't know he was in there. And then I had to get his little burnt body parts out of my heat tool. How gross is that? Okay, moving on. So here I figured rather than heat emboss them all over again, I'm very carefully maneuvering my sentiment die to cut both of them out of their sentiment and then just making them shorter. So here I am cutting them both out away from their sentiment. Then you'll see me flip them around and fit them in place and just kind of measure out where I think the rest should be cut off. And I actually did it without making a mistake. I did not have to re-emboss or stamp anything again. So that's a win for me, guys. So here I'm going to adhere all my leaves now. I have them placed pretty much where I want with my Nouveau Deluxe adhesive. Got a magnet holding down the card background for me there. And I skipped through this fairly quickly. But I wanted them to look kind of natural, but leave more like a border around the edge so that I had room for my sentiment. And I kind of left the It's and Y'all cut like the sentiment strip I used. But then I tried to cut around the word fall kind of close without leaving too much of a border, because I'm never good at cutting anything into a straight sentiment strip, and plus that word's fairly large. I don't think it would have looked right that way. So I'm going to trim all the excess from both sets of leaves off of the card panel itself. And there you see I believe I have both done here. Yep. The first one is the gold embossed, and this one is the hot foil. And I have to say, I was fairly surprised. If you guys remember, I used Bristol to ink blend. So that means all of those hot foiled, I mean, they didn't all come out perfect, but for the most part they did. And the hot foil worked on the ink blended Bristol cardstock fine for me. Fine for me. You know what I mean, guys. So here I'm going to kind of stagger it with It's and then fall's going to kind of be tilted to one side, and then yaw as straight as I can get it underneath that. And those are both going to be glued to a 4.25 by 5.5 landscape opening card base, A2 sized. And I'm just using my Nouveau Deluxe adhesive for that. And that's it. I thought with all the splatter and stuff, they didn't need any embellishments. So now I'm looking at all these cute foxes, and I know I only have time for maybe one more card. So I had to use one of them. So here I'm taking out like my 4th or 5th largest shaker or circle die. You can see by where it sets on the cardstock how big it is. That's an A2 size panel there. And then, actually I believe that's an A2 size card base. Then I took a larger die by 2 sizes and cut out my acetate, which is just used packaging. And then I did a circle about 1/4 inch in and scored it along my scoreboard, turning it just so it remained in a circle a little bit as I scored. And now I'm taking 1/4 inch marks and making them all the way around. Because, of course, when you try to fold a circle inward, it's going to leave bulks and bulges. So it's the same thing as quilting if you quilt a circle. Got to kind of make those lines so that there's no bulge and everything goes smoothly. So now I ink blended some grass from a die cut panel. And I also used the other half of the die cut to ink straight onto my circle panel. And I ended up using a larger panel circle than I cut, but just go with the first one you chose, or I chose, if you're following the size I used, because I did end up having to trim a little bit off. I just didn't want too much of the acetate showing, but I don't think it really would have if I had to trim some off of this circle. Now I'm just going to see here where I expect my fox to go, and then I cut out little masks from the falling leaves that came in the stamp set. It does stamp as one stamp, but I just cut them all apart. Now I'm using a mask cut from an extra piece of craft cardstock, covering my grass and ink blending my sky. I started out with that speckled egg, but something was wrong with my light blue brush. I think my son might have trimmed a little bit off the bristles because it seemed uneven. So I went in with my stormy sky, ink blended that, and then tried to find a different brush to then ink blend some speckled egg in there. And then went back to the stormy sky to finish it off. And I toyed with the idea of putting little tiny clouds on there and decided against it because I wanted those falling leaves to be a focal point, one of them anyway. And if there was clouds up there too, along with this being a shaker, I think it would have been too much. So I'm just taking some yellow-green markers from my Ola markers and doing a little like flecks on the green grass. On the panel itself, I only did one color. On the one that's going to be glued to the front, I did 3 different colors to add dimension to my grass. Now I'm putting red double-sided adhesive all the way around my panel. Then I'm going to mark where I want to cut my panel of grass. Trim that down, but we're not gluing that on yet. Now I am taking all the backing off my double-sided adhesive a little bit at a time and adhering all those little cut slots I made on the circle of acetate. Make sure you leave a space, just like our rectangle full-size shakers, to put your embellishments in. So I do that coming up here. It doesn't have to be humongous. And now I have the sequin mix that I got in with my stamps and dies from the Rabbit Hole Designs. Added those to my shaker pouch. And then I adhered the rest of the little acetate slots down. I went over them with my bone folder to make sure they were adhered and secure. Now I'm going to take the Niveau Deluxe adhesive and add it to the grass on the outside of the acetate. And then I added foam tape to the back of that to adhere it to the A2 base. I'm losing the words, guys. Anyway, I added glue to that, so I had a little bit of wiggle room, make sure it was straight and even. Card base. It's a card base, guys. No front card panel on this one, just the card base and the circle shaker pouch. Now I'm doing an inside panel because I wanted to use another fox. I had to, they're just too cute. I put him down in the right hand corner, and then I put "It's Fall, Y'all," and that'll be on the inside. We're going to glue that on before we add anything else to the front. And I don't know if I told you guys, but I colored these with zigs. I think I might have showed it in the last video. I think the color on my foxes turned out really nice. It's been a while since I used zigs. Now I'm adhering that fox, and I'm letting his leaves hang over a little bit because there was one section of acetate that hung over there. And then we have leafy sidewalks and crisp morning air. Then I'm adhering some of those loose leaves that I colored with the zigs on the outside of the shaker panel and on the card base itself. We're almost done here. This is another one where I thought about the embellishments, but the leaves really are the embellishment on this one. And I had a few extra, and I didn't want to crowd the front too much, so I put those last three on the inside with our little fox. Now him and his little snail aren't lonely. And there's still plenty of room to write what you want to write on there. So that's it for this video, guys. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you like what you saw here today, and the notification bell so you'll know when the new video comes out. Don't forget to check out Instagram because there's new inspiration from the design team every day, and join our Facebook fan page. Lots of surprise giveaways in there, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.